All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel, and we continue our series in the Kybalion. We are all the way to chapter 14 now, so getting close to the finish. This chapter is entitled Mental Gender. And last week, in the last episode in this series, we went over the previous chapter, which was gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. And this was the seventh of the seven great Hermetic laws or principles. And so I realized I did a lot of rambling last time, which is what I tend to do all the time, anyways, but we'll see if I can keep that to a minimum today. And thank you for being here and joining me. We are reading once again the Kybalion for purposes of teaching and commentary and expanding the mind so that through an increased awareness, we can increase the quality of our lives and hopefully the lives of those around us. Chapter 14, Mental Gender, begins by saying, quote, students of psychology who have followed the modern trend of thought along the lines of mental phenomena are stuck by the persistence of the dual mind idea, which has manifested itself so strongly during the past 10 or 15 years, of which has given rise to a number of plausible theories regarding the nature and constitution of these two minds. The late Thompson J. Hudson attained great popularity in 1893 by advancing his well-known theory of the objective and the subjective minds. Now, you've probably heard this before, the objective versus the subjective realities. And so these two minds, objective and subjective minds, which he held existed in every individual, other writers have attracted almost equal attention by the theories regarding the conscious and the subconscious minds. So these two minds that we all have, the voluntary and involuntary minds, the active and passive minds, etc., and etc. The theories of the various writers differ from each other, but there remains, as always, when looking at the nature of reality and natural law and how we can use an understanding of that to function practically in application to the living of our lives. But these two minds, now keep in mind what we were talking about last time with gender, how there are these two principles, the masculine and the feminine, in all things. So not the common ordinary understanding of the sexes as male and female, but this is an embodiment of aspects and characteristics that make up these principles of masculine and feminine, because this plays a role in all things, whether you are male or female. The masculine and feminine is embodied in all of us. And so looking at these two minds now, the conscious and the subconscious, the voluntary, involuntary, active and passive, objective and subjective. The various writers differ from each other, but there remains this underlying principle of the quote unquote duality of mind. And so when we're looking at this law or principle of gender, it implies this underlying duality in the nature of all things. The kitten is excited today, ladies and gentlemen. Say hello to the kitten in the comments below. The student of the Hermetic philosophy is tempted to smile when he or she reads and hears of these many quote unquote new theories regarding the duality of mind, each school adhering tenaciously to its own pet theories, and each claiming to have discovered the truth. The student turns back the pages of occult history. And away back, oh, she likes the string. She likes the string. And away back in the dim beginnings of occult teachings, he finds the references to the ancient Hermetic doctrine of the principle of gender on the mental plane rather than the physical plane. And remember, this principle is manifest on all planes of reality or existence. And the three great planes coming to us from the philosophy of this book was the spiritual, akashic, the ethereal principle, the mental plane, rather. So we have the spiritual, the mental, and the physical, the three great planes, which are broken up into 7 subsequent minor planes. But coming back to here, this principle of gender being manifest on the mental plane rather than the physical plane, the manifestation of mental gender. And examining further, he finds that the ancient philosophy took cognizance of the phenomena of the dual mind and accounted for it by the theory of mental gender. And so we're accounting for this concept of dual mind with the understanding of the law or principle of gender and its application to the mental plane. And once again, disclaimer, this is very complex, this is very deep. And Thoth, or Hermes Trismegistus, taught us that a pure philosophy is a spiritual striving through what? A constant contemplation, constant meditation, a constant ponderation, a constant rumination upon these things, so that we may come to attain the true knowledge of Atum, or the one God, or grand organized design, or infinite intelligence. Whatever you call it, it's the same thing that we're speaking of here, trying to harmonize with and trying to bring into action into our lives. And another disclaimer, I am no master. I am purely a student and maybe even a bad one at that. But so what we're doing here is I'm inviting you to join me in my journey of learning these things for myself and trying to extrapolate my thoughts on what it may mean for me and us. I had an incredible comment on the last video, and I would like to pay honor to that right now, real quick. And so someone said here, it was the pre-diabetic runner. I appreciate you for watching. Thank you so much. And I was honored by this comment. He said, I've heard this before. I've read it before. Just got new meaning from it. Hopefully, I can keep it for a while in my head. Thanks for the perspective. Well, thank you so much for the comment. I'm honored, and I want to honor that comment by trying to do just that again. And it just astounds me because to me, this is just my ramblings. But so I'm so thankful that you've heard this before, that you've read this before, and that I am somehow bringing new perspective to add to this group process of us all growing in consciousness. But I'm rambling, so let me continue. Thank you. Examining further, we find that this ancient philosophy of this strange phenomena of the dual mind is accounted for by this theory of mental gender. How so? Well, let's let the book continue. This idea of mental gender may be explained in a few words to students who are familiar with the modern theories just alluded to. The masculine principle of mind corresponds to the so-called objective mind, the conscious mind, voluntary mind, active mind, etc. And those of us that have done much study of the conscious and the subconscious mind will start to make connections, some ahas, satoris, enlightenments of understanding as we go through this. The feminine principle, so the masculine principle, which is the expansive or electric, the active, the feminine being the contractive, magnetic, passive. This comes from the teachings of an initiation into Hermetics by Franz Barden. That's a different study in its own. However, it applies and can be connected. And so the feminine principle of mind corresponds to the so-called subjective mind, the subconscious, the involuntary. And isn't it interesting? In the last chapter, it talked about the feminine principle being responsible for the creation and the creative process, using influence from the masculine principle. And so once again, when you think of creativity and where does the process of creation and creativity come from on the mental plane, in our minds, it is almost always the subconscious. Because the conscious mind is constantly keeping track of all the things that we should watch out for and be afraid of and worry about, or the things that we are most enthusiastic about. But we really have to let go of that conscious mind in order to tap into what some call the muse, or that higher source that gives us the inspiration and the ideas that we get for the things that I'm rambling again. Let me continue. The subconscious mind, involuntary, passive, etc., are all of the feminine principle. So I'll say that once more. Masculine principle, objective, conscious mind. Feminine principle, subjective, subconscious mind. Of course, the book continues, the Hermetic teachings do not agree with many modern theories regarding the nature of the two phases of mind, nor does it admit that many of the facts claimed for the two respective aspects, some of the said theories and claims being very far-fetched and incapable of standing the test of experiment and demonstration. We point to the phases of agreement merely for the purpose of helping the student to assimilate our previously acquired knowledge and meld it, I'll add, into this new awareness, this new understanding, the teachings of the Hermetic philosophy. Students of Hudson will notice the statement at the beginning of his second chapter of, quote, the law of psychic phenomena. I've never heard of this Hudson fellow. Sounds fascinating. The late Thompson J. Hudson, advancing his well-known theory of the objective and subjective minds. I'll have to look that up. Very interesting. Let us continue. Hermetic teachings, we point to the phases of agreement for the purpose of helping us to assimilate our previously acquired knowledge or understandings with these new teachings. And students of Hudson will notice at the beginning of his second chapter of the law of psychic phenomena that, quote, the mystic jargon of the Hermetic philosophies or philosophers discloses the same great general idea. And this is something I'll find that I have found so far in my research, is that when somebody gets to real, at least for me, real quality explanations of wisdom that we can use in our lives that applies to natural law and the function of the mind and how to create reality using your mind, always harkens back to this Hermetic understanding, what I like to reference as the wisdom of the ages. But it wasn't just the Hermeticists that had this knowledge. It goes across a great many mystery traditions. But once again, it was Dr. Hudson rather, that said this mystic jargon of the Hermetic philosophers discloses this same great understanding of the law of psychic phenomena. An example, the duality of mind. That there is a oneness and yet a separateness, and there is an active and yet a passive, and a subjective and objective. Now, if Dr. Hudson had taken the time and trouble to decipher a little of the quote-unquote mystic jargon of the Hermetic philosophy, he might have received much light upon the subject of the quote-unquote dual mind. But then, perhaps, his most interesting work might have not been written. Let us now consider the Hermetic teachings regarding this concept of mental gender and the duality of mind. The Hermetic teachers impart their instruction regarding this subject by bidding their students examine the report of their consciousness regarding ourselves. The book says their self. The students are bidden to turn their attention inward upon the self dwelling within each of us. Each student is led to see that his consciousness gives him first a report of the existence of ourself. The report is, I am. You know, the old, I think, therefore I am. I must exist because I am. This at first seems to be the final words from the consciousness, but a little further examination discloses the fact that this quote unquote I am may be separated or split into two distinct parts or aspects, which while working in unison, so the oneness, the paradoxical oneness in duality, it's my favorite, it always comes out of all of this, is the oneness in duality. That our consciousness gives us the first report of the existence of ourselves. The report is I am. But this can be separated or split into two distinct parts or aspects, which while working in unison and in conjunction, yet nevertheless may be separated in consciousness. What is being said here? Well, I'll add, have you ever had the thought, it's like, why do I continue to do this? And it's like, who is the one asking the question, and then who is the I? There are two people. When somebody likes or dislikes themselves, there's there's duality going on there. There is the I and then the me. And so, while at first the book continues, quote, while at first there seems to be only an I existing, a more careful and closer examination it reveals that there exists an I and a me, the witness, and then the witness of the witness. And if you have not had this experience personally, I would be extremely surprised, but this is something that we need to cultivate within ourselves in order to create more peace, in order to create greater perspective, and so that we can go through the struggles that we are supposed to grow through and go through in life in order to grow from. But without this somewhat detached perspective of cultivating the witness in our consciousness or our minds, cultivating the observer, it's a lot more difficult to have the perspective we need to be able to be detached and then grow from the things that we are going through in life. So in order to create greater peace, greater perspective, greater progress in life, the 3 P's, I just made that up out of nowhere, greater peace, greater perspective, and greater progress in life, we need to begin to recognize this duality of the mind, which is being described here in the 14th chapter of the Kybalion, entitled Mental Gender, looking at the 2 aspects of this dual nature of our mind. Let us begin, the book continues, with a consideration of the me, which is usually mistaken for the I. These mental twins differ in their characteristics and nature, and an examination of their nature and the phenomena arising, the actions, the crazy activities coming out of the same will throw much light upon many of the problems of mental influence. So, this me, as compared to the I, which is usually mistaken for the I by the student, until he presses the inquiry a little further back into the recesses of our minds or our consciousness. A man thinks of his self in its aspects of quote unquote me as being composed of certain feelings, certain tastes, certain likes and dislikes, habits, peculiarities, characteristics. We create this personal identity, a personality, which then becomes our personal reality. So if you want to make a new personal reality, what do? You work backwards to your identity and personality. This, that goes back to the mask. You put on this persona. We're given this idea of who we are and where, how we're supposed to behave, what we're supposed to do, where we're supposed to go. And all of this is thrown on to us from, our environment, our surroundings, our upbringings, the influential people in our lives, our parents, our teachers, our, whoever that would be. And also, like I stated already, the environment where we find ourselves in the world. And this ends up creating this persona of who we think we are. The me, or is it the I? Well, let me continue. Because this me is usually mistaken for the I. And this, we once again, this character, this persona we create, the certain feelings, tastes, likes, dislikes, our habits, characteristics, etc., all of which go to make up our personality or the quote unquote self known to ourselves, himself or herself, and others. And we know that these emotions and feelings change over time and are born, and they also die away and are subject to the principle of rhythm, which was a previous principle in this journey or a previous law of hermetics. Also subject to the law or the principle of polarity. Everything has its poles and its pair of opposites. Rhythm is everything flows, everything has its ins and outs, or its peaks and valleys, so to speak, but which take us, this rhythm and this polarity that take us from one extreme of feeling and emotion to another. And so we also think of the me, quote unquote, as being certain knowledge gathered together in our mind over time and through our experiences of our lives, and thus forming a part of ourselves. This is the me. But we have proceeded too hastily. We've gotten ahead of ourselves here. We're putting the horses in front of the cart, as the old saying goes. The quote unquote me of many men may be said to consist largely of our consciousness, of their consciousness, and the consciousness of the body and its physical appetites, etc. And so their consciousness being largely bound up with the bodily nature, we practically live from the physical sensations that we experience, and it's very easy to have that be the entire focus while we are living our lives because it's the most apparent. I would call this the conscious mind. It's making me think of the drunken monkey. It's just that part of the mind that's constantly going, constantly throwing things at you. But some men even go so far, men or women, to regard their personal apparel as part of their me. We all know somebody in our lives who is so focused, so taken by their physical appearance that it seems to distract from the true nature of what they're actually doing or trying to do. But some of us go so far as to regard our personal apparel as part of our me, our personality, our persona, and actually seem to consider it as part of themselves. A writer has humorously said that men consist of three parts: soul, body, and clothes. The clothes that we wear. These clothes conscious people, the book states, would lose their personality if divested of their clothing by savages upon the occasion of a shipwreck, to put it in a funny way. But even many who are not so closely bound up with the idea of personal arraignment stick closely to the consciousness of their bodies being their me because of, once again, these physical desires and sensations in our physical appetites, making up of more than just the appetite for food. But this was the analogy that I want to speak about in the future when we go through the Initiates of the Flame by Manly P. Hall, is this concept of pulling the spirit, which is just the allegory or the metaphor of the sword and the stone, pulling our spirit out of our lower nature, which is trapped in the trappings of the physical appetites, quote unquote, which is bound up with our physical bodily nature, but we have to pull our spirit out of our lower nature in order to reach higher levels for our spirit or our consciousness, our soul, our personal growth. But once again, we'll get to that in the future. I really look forward to starting that, so hopefully we can start that soon. If you know about Manly P. Hall, let me know in the comments of what you think. I think his pictures look pretty scary, but man, this guy had some philosophy, I'll tell you what. Now, let me continue. But even many who are so closely bound up with this, we cannot conceive of a self independent of our body. So our identity separate from not just our clothes or our appearance, but of our body. Because if you haven't come to realize this yet and you're here watching this video, then amazing. But here is the time to realize that you are not your body. We may be inhabiting, this may be a garage for our soul that houses the soul, or a vehicle for our growth, for our leveling up, so to speak. But it is not who we really are. And there was one wise Nazarene master, guru, that said, in order to truly live, we must die while we are still alive. What did he mean? Well, he didn't mean that literally. He meant this figuratively or metaphorically, that we must abandon or lose our identification with our physical nature. But the ego makes that so difficult for us to do because it constantly wants to remind us, listen, you can't do this because without me, we're not going to survive in this physical world. And that's very true. The ego allows us as a species to survive and to continue to go through the lower, grosser natures, we'll say, of this physical reality. But the ego, it's a good quote to remember, makes an excellent servant, but a terrible master. So don't become the servant of your ego. Make it the other way around. I'm rambling again, but thank you for being here. If you're getting value, please leave a comment below and let me know what you're thinking. Smash the like button. They cannot conceive of a self that is independent of the body, but you are not your body. You are much greater than that. You are a spark of the divine. You have a spark of divinity within. You are your own master, your own guru, and you need not go on bended knee to somebody else's savior, because that wise master taught us that you are it. You have the power within you. Even the least among us can do all of these things that I have done and even greater things this master once taught. But let's not get caught up on that, because there's a lot of connotations there. We're talking about true personal power here, using an understanding and a greater awareness of the laws and the nature of reality. So back to going beyond this self that is just the body. And those, we can't even conceive of this usually when we haven't thought of it yet. Their minds seem to them to be practically a something belonging to, quote unquote, our body, which in many cases it is indeed. But as a man or a woman rises in the scale of consciousness, he is able to disentangle this me from our idea of body, and is able to think of our body as belonging to the mental part of ourselves. The cat's always looking for things to play with, ladies and gentlemen. If you have a kitten, I'm sure you understand. Now, they also like to be a great distraction in the midst of much philosophy. But a little levity is key, because this can get deep. And I always like to say, if you feel like you're not getting very much from this and it's hard to understand, then that's a good thing. Let it ruminate, let it resonate, meditate upon it. Just ponder, and these ahas will start to click in, because if you think that you're getting all of this perfectly, then you're probably not picking up very much at all. So, this me, disentangled from our idea of body, is able to think then of our body as belonging to the mental part of us, or the spiritual part of us, I would add. But even then, he is very apt to identify the me entirely with the mental states, our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions, which he feels, the book continues, to exist within us. He or she feels. We are very apt to consider these internal states as identical with ourselves. Instead, see, it's got me thinking in multiple directions here. It's identical with ourselves, instead of there being simply things produced by some part of our minds or our mentality, and existing within us, of us, and in us, but still not ourselves. Let me read this again word for word, as what the book says, quote, "But as man rises in the scale of consciousness, he is able to disentangle his me from his idea of body, and is able to think of his body as belonging to, quote unquote, the mental part of him. But even then, he is very apt to identify the me entirely with the mental states, feelings, etc., which he feels to exist within him. He is very apt to consider these internal states as identical with himself, instead of instead of them being things that are simply just produced by some part of our mentality and existing within us, of us, in him, but still not himself. He sees that he may change these internal states of feelings by an effort of the will. Boom, ladies and gentlemen. That is a huge teaching there. And that he or she, we may produce a feeling or a state of an exactly opposite nature of the one that we may be feeling at any given moment through, once again, what? An effort of the will. How often are you exercising your will? And how strong has your quote unquote muscles of willpower grown? And then there's muscle memory. Metaphorically speaking, here, how well have you practiced and created a muscle memory of will that you can use it without great effort? Well, this can be done. And this is what many would call real magic, and going in the direction of experiencing a much happier, much more peaceful, much more content, fulfilled, all of the things that we are wanting in life, not just for ourselves, but everybody else. I didn't even check the volume on this. I hope the volume's been good in this recording. I'm just going to assume so. All right. But this is important. These are great teachings here. And so let me continue. This effort of the will. And so we can begin to produce a feeling or a state of an exactly opposite nature in the same way, and yet the same me still exists, despite all the goings on, all the going ons or goings on of our minds. And yet the same me still exists. And so after a while, we're able to set aside these various mental states, emotions, feelings, habits, qualities, characteristics, and other personal mental belongings. And we are able to set them aside in the quote unquote not me. As you go, oh, wait, this is like, you are not your thoughts. So if you're having crazy thoughts, like, don't beat yourself up. Use an effort of the will. Sometimes, requires some kind of stimulus, whether that be visuals or sounds or smells or something, to change that state, because you have the ability to control your mind and your thoughts. But if we don't exercise that ability, it atrophies and we lose it. And then we got to work really hard to build it back up. And if we've never been taught this, then you're sitting there going, wait a minute, really? You're telling me that I'm not, that I can change my thoughts, but I just keep having these thoughts over and over. Well, what happens when you do something over and over? You practice it, you get better at it, and then you can almost do it without even trying. So think of a time where something really small, insignificant happens, and instantly you go back into the same pattern of thinking, because that's what you've practiced so much, you've gotten so good at it that you can do it automatically, and it doesn't really take much at all. This usually works in the area of frustration. Like the simplest thing, like the kitten doing all this. If I had practiced frustration, it would be very easy to go there. But luckily, I have practiced I don't know, I was going to say patience, but there's also, you see what I'm saying here. We get good at what we practice, and we can use the will to change our minds. And we are not our minds. We are the creator behind that. Let me get back to the book here. But this is profound and incredible and important. This is amazing. This is why I'm doing this. because I need these constant reminders that this is reality, that we can do this, that this effort of the will is possible, and that we are able to set these previously thought emotions and feelings and habits that we thought was us aside into a new category of this is not me. This new collection of curiosities and encumbrances, as well as valuable possessions. This requires, however, I'll say, this requires much mental concentration and power of mental analysis. Remember that detached, cultivating the witness. I never know what I'm going to title these videos. Cultivating the witness. This mental analysis on the part of the student. But still, the task is possible for the advanced student, and even those not so far advanced are able to see in the imagination how the process may be performed. After this laying aside process has been performed, this laying aside of the things that we previously would identify as ourselves, creating our identity. She's really testing my patience this time. This should be a fun watch for those of you watching. I think she's jumped on the back of the chair about 3 times. All right, ladies and gentlemen. After laying aside, the student will find himself in conscious possession of a quote unquote self or a new self, which may be considered in its I and me dual aspects. Getting back to the beginning of this video, the duality of mind, the conscious and the subconscious, the active and the passive, the subjective and the objective. The I and the me dual aspects. The me will be felt to be a something mental in which thoughts, ideas, emotions, feelings, and other mental states may be produced. It may be considered as the mental womb. As the ancients styled it, the mental womb. Think of that one. What do you think, Beans? Capable of generating mental offspring. So when thinking about gender and the masculine and the feminine being responsible for the creation process, this will go perfectly with the last video of this series. So if you missed that one, check that out. Being influenced by the masculine principle, the feminine principle is responsible for the generation or creation of all things. Also in the mental realm here, or on the mental plane, is capable of generating mental offspring. It reports to the consciousness as a me, quote unquote, with latent powers of creation and generation of the mental progeny of all sorts and kinds. Its powers of creative energy are felt to be enormous, ladies and gentlemen. But still, it seems to be conscious that it must receive some form of energy from either its I, companion, or else form some other I. Does playful bites? Are you silly? Form some other I. See, this is the influence. Once again, the masculine principle influencing the feminine principle, responsible for creation. The oneness in duality. It is a harmony or a cooperation. And so this kind of consciousness, this I companion, is able to bring into being its mental creations, and this consciousness brings with it a realization of an enormous capacity for mental work and creative ability. Ladies and gentlemen, I seen that coming. She's getting playful. She's being silly. The student soon finds that this is not all that he finds within his or her inner consciousness. He finds that there exists a mental something which is able to will that the me act along certain creative lines, and which is also able to stand aside and witness the mental creation. The part of himself he is taught to call his I. He is able to rest in its consciousness at will. He finds there not a consciousness of an ability to generate and actively create in the sense of gradual process attended upon mental operations, but rather a sense and consciousness of an ability to project an energy from the I to the me, a process of willing that the mental creation begin and proceed. See, this is funny. I've been listening to this 10-hour long video. It was a lecture that Napoleon Hill gave on his principles or on the philosophy of success or the success philosophy. But this is the exact same thing that he was describing here. This, like when we talk to our subconscious mind, we can will it to do things, especially when you sleep. Have you ever had this problem that you're working on and you tried 5, 10, how many ever times you can't seem to get it? And there's that old quote, well, sleep on it. And then you sleep on it the next day, you come back and first try, got it. And it's like, how? How is that possible? When previously I tried many, many times and it didn't work. And it's today, first try, got it. This is the power that's being described right now, right here. This influencing of the will to the subconscious that then translates back in through so that we can produce results. Does this sound complex? Because it is, and it's a mystical process. But a mystic is a one who seeks. And we are doing that here today, ladies and gentlemen. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Man, we've got 7 pages to go in this chapter, and this has been profound and amazing thus far. Well, let me go a little bit further and we'll find a good stopping point here in this chapter, because this already is enough for us to contemplate on and want to try to work on. I want to read that last bit there, and we'll make it to the end of that paragraph. As above, so below. As below, so above. The student will find that this is not all that we find within our inner consciousness. We find that there exists a mental something which is able to will that the quote unquote me act along certain creative lines, and which is also able to stand aside and witness the mental creation. This part of ourselves we are taught to call our I. And we are able to rest in its consciousness at will. He finds that there is not a consciousness of an ability to generate and actively create in the sense of gradual process upon mental operations, but rather a sense and consciousness of an ability to project, I'll add an intention or a desire, to project an energy from the I to the me, a process of willing that the mental creation begin and proceed, going from the world or the realm of waves to the world of particles. And this is how all things are created. In reality, especially the more we discover about quantum physics. And so, we also find that the I is able to stand aside and witness the operations of the me's mental creation and generation. There is this dual aspect in the mind of every person. And this is an embodiment of the seventh great Hermetic principle of gender on the mental plane. This chapter being entitled Mental Gender. Anybody who says this is not Hermetic philosophy, I think, is being too specific. This is just great wisdom. I don't care what name you put on it. But if I heard somebody describing this to me, I would say, man, you're into Hermetics, aren't you? And even if they said, what's that? I'd say, you already have a good idea, even if you haven't heard of it before. Because an understanding of this art that is being described right here in this 14th chapter of the Kybalion of mental gender is truly the secret, the greatest secret, the strangest secret. What you think about expands. So be very careful of what you focus on, because it will begin to become a part of your life. I'm not reading, I'm just rambling now. And I haven't been reading exactly word for word. I'll be reading and then I'll add my own words here and there to emphasize more. But so just a disclaimer there. This is for purposes of teaching and commentary, expanding the mind. This is amazing, though. The mental creation process to begin and proceed. There is this dual aspect in the mind of every person. The I represents the masculine principle of the mental plane, of mental gender. The me represents the female, feminine principle. The I represents the aspect of being. The me, the aspect of becoming. I'm going to have to meditate on this one more. This is profound. So once again, the masculine principle was the active. Let's go back. I want to keep my spot there, but this is important to reference here because we're making connections here. The active and passive minds, the voluntary and involuntary, the conscious and subconscious. The masculine principle of mental gender corresponds to the objective conscious mind. Feminine principle corresponds to the subjective subconscious, involuntary. Coming back to the spot where we're at right now, the I represents the masculine principle of mental gender. The me represents the feminine principle. The I represents the aspect of being. The me, the aspect of becoming. So the subconscious is the aspect of becoming. The conscious mind is the aspect of being. The I, yes, okay, aspect of being. You will notice that the principle of correspondence, which is another of the seven great Hermetic laws, principles, operates on this plane just as it does upon the great plane upon which the creation of the universe. It says here the creation of universes, multiverse. This is profound, ladies and gentlemen. This is profound. You will notice that the principle of correspondence operates on this plane just as it does upon the great plane upon which the creation of universes is performed. These two are similar in kind, although they are vastly different in degree. There's a great statement from this philosophy is that they can be similar in nature, but they vary vastly by a difference of degree. How is that understood or described, ladies and gentlemen? Well, we'll leave it there with the great quote and saying of Hermetics: as above, so below, and as below, so above. Wow. Wow, ladies and gentlemen, that is a boom to spiritual philosophy. That's a boom to the Kybalion and the three initiates and the concept, understanding of dual mind and mental gender, and how the principles of gender, masculine and feminine principles, manifest themselves on the plane of the mind, or the great mental plane. That was amazing, ladies and gentlemen. And I think let's give a few more shout outs real quick here to those who left comments on our previous video. Introduction to the Kybalion, masculine and feminine, the Hermetic principle of gender. Let's take a look at our comments there. Great to have you back. Yes, it was great to be back. Yeah, it had been almost a year since I had done a video on this channel. Neo Talk 33 says inspiring and helpful monologue. Thank you very much. Like, I truly appreciate that, because oftentimes I'll look back at these and wonder, man, hopefully I was rambling too much, getting off topic, didn't make sense, but we are often our worst critics. And so I just wanted to thank you so much, Neo Talk 33, for the comment. Inspiring and helpful monologue. I really appreciate that. Super Tinker 41, thank you so much. Says, honor to the seasons indeed. Yes, the seasons of life. Not even nature can sustain a forced action. So it can storm as much as it wants to, but it cannot storm forever. There are these seasons of life. There's time for action and there's time for rest. Each is equally valuable. And now, thinking about this understanding of the principle or law of gender, and the active and the passive, and the active influencing the passive in order to have the creation or generation, anyways, it is necessary for both. Glad to have you back. Thank you so much, Super Tinker 41. Betsy Shackelford comments twice here. 11 hours ago, one of them says, I've just started to read the Exegesis of Philip. We're friends in real life. Totally love to get your take on it. The monologues that I do, just would be pretty interesting to hear them on this subject matter. Well, I'm interested in all kinds of subject matter. This is exactly how I found myself interested in Manly P. Hall. People had commented in the past on these videos and said, have you heard of him? He talks a lot about this kind of subject matter. Anywho, love the latest painting. Thank you so much, Betsy. I really appreciate that. She says, it's cool to see the evolution of your art. Take it easy, man. And yeah, give him a read sometime if you get the chance. I'll definitely look into that. Thank you so much. She also commented 3 days ago, so happy to see this on my feed. Missed your posts, man. Well, I missed being here, and I'm doing this in honor of those of you that appreciate this. It means so much to me that you get something out of this. I am, and hopefully you do as well. And it seems like you are. Also, Alien Allen. Man, that was a great jar of honey, but that was many years ago. Reference and a shout out to LeakCon. That was a long time ago. It was a convention hosted by Rex Bear of the Leak Project, as well as Diamond from Oppenheimer Ranch Project. Excellent people, great information. Shout out to you, Alien Allen. It was great to get to meet you guys. That one time that we had a sweet in-person event for those of us who are like-minded or of like mind. And so those were the comments in my last video. My mom also said, wonderful to have you back. Love you, Mom. Great to see you here. I'm surprised I didn't make my tea today. I must have been focused on getting here and getting this done, ladies and gentlemen. To the paintings as well. What did she say? Love the latest painting. Cool to see the evolution of your art. Thank you so much. Actually, this painting is from like 5 or 6 years ago. I just had it laying around. I use these to cover up you know, cover up the crazy background that there is in such a small living quarters, as we could call it. But I do have a website. I built a Shopify website, clcpaintings.com. So no more Etsy, no more of this silliness. A standalone, legitimate website. I've spent over $1,000 over the last couple of years. The website has been up for a year now. No purchases yet. But see, that is the test. That is the challenge in life. It's like, are you willing to commit? Because I did this before, made a website, had it up for 6, 8 or 9 months, and nothing sold, and it was $40 a month, and it wasn't worth it, so I got rid of it. Can't give in, can't give up. Keep going and keep growing, ladies and gentlemen. So even if I don't make a dollar from this website that hosts my paintings, I've been doing blog posts on there as well to keep up with current projects I'm working on and any news that I have or something. Could definitely do more of that, but I've done 3 or 4 paintings in the last week or two, and man, it feels really good to be getting back to it because that's another one of those areas where you keep going, keep growing. But so if you'd like to own one of my landscape paintings for yourself, put it on your wall or your shelf, check out, there'll be a link in the description below, clcpaintings.com. Also, we will have a link before we get to the end of this. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, to seek, to achieve, and maintain happiness through enlightenment. Through what? Through a greater awareness and understanding of the nature of ourselves and reality, so that through that increased awareness, we can hopefully increase the quality of our lives and the lives of those around us. Remember to seek the hidden wisdom of the ages and the mysteries of our history, ladies and gentlemen. Also, expand the description below to get this book for yourself, to put it on your shelf so you can follow along in future episodes of this series, as well as go along with me in previous episodes, as we have almost completed this entire book. As well, we have completed an entire series of the Corpus Hermeticum, the Divine Pymander, and the Hermetica, which was my personal favorite, especially the beginning and the history of the Hermetica. This introduction to this book here is so incredible and profound on how this wisdom has played an incredible role in humanity and the greatest minds and times and renaissances of culture and humanity throughout all of our history. So we'll leave it there, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, thank you so much. I love and appreciate each and every one of you. Those are Amazon affiliate links, so that helps support the work that we do here. But if you really want to support me, visit my website and make me figure out the process, because Etsy had its own process of you get the order, and then it gives you the shipping information, and then I package it up and add in something a little extra because I really appreciate everybody who does purchase my paintings. But I've yet to go through that process on my new website. Well, a year old, we can call it new. Anyways, so give me something to do there, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll give you a painting, maybe two, for the price of one. Also, a link to C60 Power, the ultimate antioxidant the most powerful antioxidant known to man. Give yourself the gift of health. If you've never heard of C60, do a quick Google search. You will be surprised and amazed. All right. No more rambling. Love you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. And until next time, be the change that you want to see. Be the example that you want to set. No, 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 no.